Electra as a child drawing herself, little stick figure self-portrait over the baby.
Yeah, well, at the time, again, maybe there's more of that language has been incorporated and expanded upon by, and just like sort of taken and just run with it, and like David's done. You know, it's like there's like I was influenced by Neil and by a group of people, and then David came in and was influenced by, and then he's taking it and he's running with it, like further beyond what a lot of guys are doing.
You did mention, just briefly before I cut you off the last time, the name Baron's Story. And all three of us actually have a connection to Baron's Story. Could you say a little bit about Baron?
Well, Baron was one of the illustrators that I really was inspired by in art school. There were a lot of guys who were illustrators, like Bob Peak, who was very, very well known for movie posters and for magazine illustrations. Same thing with Bernie Fuchs, Bob Heindel. Baron did a lot of stuff for National Geographic, and he could be an incredible draftsman and painter. One of his most amazingly, I think, well-known pieces was Lord of the Flies, cover for the paperback. And his work, to me, was popular illustration. I mean, Bob's work was very, very advertising-based, and he knew what to hit. Baron sort of ran between editorial, advertising, and fine art. He was sort of floated in this netherworld of extrapolation and kind of inclusion of all of those things. And in a way, what was so interesting about Baron's work is that you never knew what you were going to get. There was always an element of personal quality to his work, regardless of whether it was for Time magazine or a movie poster or whatever. Although I don't think Baron did any movie posters. I think Bob could subsume his personality into the advertising. He sort of shut off that personal part of himself and did the job. Did it better than 9 out of 100 people. But Baron's work, there was another thing underneath there that was just like, that is just, he has all the chops, but he had the artistry and the personal integrity and personality of, there was always a little bit more to his stuff that sort of inspired. And then I think on a level of inspiration, to see somebody who can do advertising and illustration and editorial work, and then somebody else who takes all of those things and is sort of like Bob Dylan, he just sort of pulls it all together. It was just
also it's kind of a pushing. He would always look, and he teaches his students, and he's taught at all the best art schools in the nation. Pratt, SVA, Ringling in Florida.
He's at CCA right now.
CCA right now. It's also Art Center in Pasadena. He was there. He was head of the illustration department for a while there. But it's like, to him, he teaches that you need to look for ways to insert yourself into the art. Don't just do a job, because if you just do a job, you're going to burn out. You've got to look for ways to make it personal, which is basically taking an illustration assignment and turning it into fine art, at which point, what can you say?
Actually, just very quickly, I just want to say that's also, I don't want to step on what David's going to say, but I was going to say that quality is also part of what made his work so interesting. I think it's also part of the work that actually sort of worked against him in some cases. Depending on how
professionally, commercially, yeah.
Commercially, right? But
no, that's all a great segue to something else I was going to riff on that you said. You mentioned the way he did things and the way maybe Bob Dylan did, and you mentioned early on in your career being inspired by jazz and all this creative stuff that was happening. And I kind of look at, as in broad strokes, as comic books as like their place in literature is they're kind of the rock and roll of literature. They're kind of not one thing.
Right.
They're this strange, weird hybrid medium.
They're definitely fusion. Yeah.
There's a fusion of there's literature there. There's there's visual art there, but they're not just one or the other. And they're this strange thing that wasn't exactly there before, and then suddenly pulled from other places and became, just like rock and roll really isn't one thing, and it didn't really exist before, but then people started incorporating rockabilly and gospel and blues and jazz and all these things, and this weird thing happened. They started to call it rock and roll. But anytime it copies off of itself and it thinks it's doing something for commercial reasons, and it starts to use itself as a template, anytime it does that, it's very cold and stale.
Right.
And the shelf life, I'm not going to badmouth any bands or anything, but you're really good at that. But anytime it starts to copy up itself, it becomes lifeless. But anytime it pulls outside of itself, and it builds onto the language that's already there, but incorporates something outside of it, like, an ethnic music from a different culture, or, and put that in, or, put some other, strange thing in, or put,
Well, it's like going back to the original sources. I mean, I was a big lead head, in high school, and, you listen to Led Zeppelin and you think, wow, there are amazing things that did in rock and roll, and then you find out that, just like the Stones and and Clapton, it's like, they were like, it's so influenced by the Mississippi blues, the Delta, and like Muddy Waters, and especially growing up in Wales, in the UK, listening to the blues and jazz, and then incorporating with a little bit of Lord of the Rings, as well. They were pulling from so many different arenas and making a fusion, and I think that in terms of comics, I found that you could see a lot of guys who were sort of copying Jack Kirby. And what you end up doing is that you end up, if you're working only from people in comics as a template, I think that you end up copying their mistakes. And what you're doing is, rather than infusing it with new life, you end up diluting the gene pool even more so. Because everybody's going to make their own mistakes. And if you're copying mistakes, you're going to make more mistakes. The mistakes are going to become more of the DNA. And what's going to happen is that rather than it being sort of evolution of survival of the fittest, or bringing in, things to make you stronger, it ends up killing it. And I think that, my influences, David's influences, and David's influences, it's like we all have our own, David with the Oriental aspect of it was, I don't think that had ever been done before, at all in this, and it pulled the infused American stuff with that whole other.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Like in terms of what comics are at their essence, this visual plus hybrid thing. I feel like it has a lot in common with, say, like the Chinese characters, the kanji characters, that you look at them and they're meant to be an aspect of writing, but they're also a picture at the same time. And I feel like comics are that too. And those, that you take one Chinese character and it's a beautiful image on its own, but it also has a certain meaning, but you put it next to another one, and once it's next to the other thing, it has an extra meaning to it, and it has a sequence to it. And I feel like comics are that way. And we sort of riffed on this idea before. The essence of comics is that instead of it has to be basically two images. You take one image of us sitting here at the table with a cat on the table, and that's all it is. But if you take another image and there's us sitting here at the table and a cat is on the floor, you put those images together, and then suddenly your mind constructs a narrative, and your mind says,
if you juxtapose it, it's like the cat jumped up or
the cat, and your mind says this happened, even though nothing moved. And there's two individual things that on their own only mean what they are. But once you put them together, that's what's fascinating. That's the magic of comics to me, is the psychology aspect, that all the movement happens in the reader's mind, and the reader is an active participant in the process of it. And so the real art of it is what happens in between the panels, in between what's really there. So the real psychology is you giving them just enough navigational instruments to make the real art happen in the reader's mind itself.
And the other thing that I think is, that I jump off on this, is that comics have been presumed and have been viewed as a medium for children forever. It's like when I first started doing comics, I'm sure that, I think when you came in, I think things there was already a level of respect that I thought it had. When I started, it's like there was literally a point where I'd mention I did comic books, and people would look at me as if I also teased small animals with power tools. I mean, it was, you know.
Which might have been true, but that was beside.
But yes, but the way it was juxtaposed, it was like there was a power
that was
tool,
for
and then
your
the
art.
animal,
Yeah.
the animal was alive, and then it's like, so wait, what came first, you know? But
You
know,
said that to him after